But you're giving introductory remarks. All right. Good afternoon. How is everybody? Good. Feeling after lunch? Did you fall asleep? I hope you took a nap in the last session and not this one. Okay. I'm Ben Welly. I'm Director of Integrated Transport at World Resources Institute. I'm really pleased to be here to discuss this session today. I have the title here, which I always forget, but Resilient Connectivity in Small Island Developing States. And I think we'll get into that term itself because we have representation here, not just from islands, but other small states and so forth that face similar issues. So I look forward to hear a little bit about that nuance. We are just going to dive right into the sort of topics that we're going to be covering. But before we do so, I do want to just actually call on the panelists to introduce themselves first instead of asking me I'll take that responsibility off of myself. So why don't we start out with you, Jan, and if you do need a microphone, I'm happy to hand this one to you.
Okay, this one works. Thank you very much, Ben. Very happy to be here. My name is Jan Hoffmann. I'm working on maritime and ports here at the World Bank since 2 months. Before that, I worked for 30 years for the United Nations, including UNCTAD, and I was asked actually to speak a bit about what we developed at UNCTAD about shipping connectivity. So that's what I start now, I guess.
Yeah.
Clock count.
Actually, we'll go through it.
We go through first. Okay, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Manish Katari. I'm President and CEO of Shaladi Associates. We've been in consulting business for 50 years, and driving change and delivering solutions every year is becoming more and more challenging. But nevertheless, it's a profession I'm very passionate about. I'm also the member of the board at FIDIC for the global agencies. And then I am also on the Industry Leadership Council for American Society of Civil Engineers, where I chair the resilience and sustainability work, and then more during the presentation.
Great. I think we've got mics. We can keep that mic over here. Minister?
Yes, good afternoon. And I'm Bishop Juan Edghill, the Minister of Public Works from Guyana. That means I also have transportation as part of my responsibility.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lenita Joseph. I'm the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Transport in St. Lucia. And by virtue of my appointment as the Permanent Secretary, I also serve as the Deputy Chairperson on our St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Salastani Ndaunambuna, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism and Civil Aviation from Fiji. Thank you.
Excellent. As you all see, we have great representation here, both on sort of perspective on the global level, but experience from high-level officials in countries who are also dealing with this issue on the global level. Why is this issue that we're talking about today important? Well, we want to talk about the key needs of connectivity for small island developing states. We also want to talk about some of the challenges that are being faced. Climate change is impacting small island developing states and other low-lying countries, and small states more significantly. I think that's an understatement than larger countries. But we also have significant connectivity issues. I think I may get these statistics wrong, but the point is to mention the importance that the cost of importing goods is upwards of 40% more in small island states than in larger countries. There are significant issues of ports. Small countries may have only 1 or 2 ports, and that may be both airport and maritime access. So bringing in goods and services into the countries are difficult. We also have issues of lack of supply of transport in coming in and out. So that can not only increase costs, but can put challenges forth in terms of logistics. And then you have just wider issues of road connectivity and issues of that if we have ports that are present, how do we get goods to market in a proper way? And with climate change happening and the geography and location of many of these countries, you see a growing issue of how to address resilience and adaptation in road networks, while also facing this longstanding need for the investment. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to ask Jan Hoffman, who brings a great wealth of experience, as you've said, with the UN and with UNCTAD and now at World Bank. So just give us some kind of opening remarks to set the scene, and we'll go from there. So thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody. And yes, some introductory thoughts that are based on maritime hard data, but I believe the concepts and issues, challenges, opportunities are for all modes of transport. So exactly now 20 years ago, at UNCTAD, we were asked to help improve connectivity, shipping connectivity. And I was scratching my head with less gray hair at that time and said, so first we need to measure connectivity. So with cutting a longer story short, we actually developed a liner shipping connectivity index, LSCI. If you want to learn one acronym and to leave this building, it's LSCI. And it's really based on hard data, how many ships, how many services, size of ships, how many direct connections, total carrying capacity. What was the last one? How many companies, very important, the level of competition. So each one of these we can argue are important. The more, the better generally. Ship sizes, one can argue up to a point. And then we developed an index based on this, and it allowed us year after year, actually it's a quarterly now, to see how do countries, how do ports, it's quarterly on the port level, develop. And with this hard data, please don't shoot the messenger, the news are not so good. So the hard data is that over the last 10 years, to give some time frame, well, on the level today, the LSCI, you remember what it stands for? Liner Shipping Connectivity Index. The average LSCI for SIDS is only 1/10 of the LSCI of non-SIDS. Yeah, that's hard data. And you think, no, but could we improve? How is it going? Unfortunately, over the last 10 years, the average global LSCI went up 10%. The average LSCI of the SIDS went down 7%. So these are averages. There are exceptions, but it's overall bad news. Now, what is the impact of this lower connectivity? And there again, I'm sorry to continue with bad news. You remember COVID? Yeah, there was some challenge, supply chain crisis, and it coincided with Red Sea, Black Sea, Panama, Ever Given, stuck in the Suez Canal, all types of problems. And when the COVID crisis, the first big crisis started, and container freight rates went up, they went through the roof, 5-fold, and charter rates 9-fold. We started simulating what will this mean for global prices. And normally we tend to say, shipping is so efficient, we are so far energy efficient, and the price of a bottle of wine from Australia in my hometown Hamburg, and so on and so forth. But if these go up 5-fold, they start making an impact. And I could, if I had, how many hours do I have? I'm sorry. Yeah. So we simulated, because it takes time to translate into higher prices, we simulated that the higher container freight rates will lead to global inflation, globally higher consumer prices of 1.5 percentage points. This is significant, 1.5 percentage point. This is so and so many additional votes for one candidate or the other. Yeah. And there was a lot of interest in this. And that was at a time when a gentleman called Paul Krugman was still saying, don't worry about inflation. And we said, we simulate. And we were right. The IMF, where is it from here, the building? It's there, no? Our IMF colleagues there. Sorry, I'm still lost here after. IMF colleagues over there, they calculated 6 months later how much did prices go up. And they said, yeah, they fall 4.5%, 5%, and 1.5 percentage points, quoting UNCTAD, we were right, are due to higher freight rates. And what about SIDS? Plus 8 percentage points. So it was, and you knew it. I mean, here, the friends from Fiji, St. Lucia, Guyana, you have seen your prices really went up during this crisis. So why is that happening? SIDS already pay more. You said about 30%, 40%. Depends how you calculate. In some measures, FOB or per ton of cargo, it's twice as much. SIDS pay twice as much than say developed countries or average. They already pay more. They have imbalances. They have less choice, less competition, diseconomies of scale, and so on and so forth. So and they depend more on maritime. So that's on the impact on inflation. And I realize I'm talking too much. I could go more in examples and disconnectivity. Now, third and last point, briefly, what can we do? Again, 3 points. First, and it's not very exciting, improve your logistics. Like everybody, it's not that SIDS have something that much special there, but yes, there is potential to invest in digitalization, invest in port reform, invest in infrastructure, make the ports climate resilient. We are, as we speak, on working on an update of a fantastic port reform toolkit, which some years ago this gentleman, Mark Ruel, initiated, developed, and I'm very proud that I'm now asked to help with the team updating it. So watch this space. In a few months, no stress, you will have the updated, revised port reform toolkit, which will also help SIDS in this type of reform. But this costs money. That leads me to a second point. As we speak, at the International Maritime Organization and the IMO, you all member states, including SIDS, are negotiating a so-called economic measure, called a levy, a tax, a contribution. And in my personal view, and SIDS have seen it. SIDS are very proactive, especially the Pacific SIDS are very positively proactive in favor of an economic measure, which will achieve two things. It will make alternative fuels competitive, which currently they're not. And secondly, the intention is to generate funding that can also help SIDS and least developed countries contribute, benefit, not suffer too much from the energy transition. I have a third point that would be a lot of discussion whether or not and how. You have seen in the news the New Deal, Hutchison, BlackRock, MSC. So you have a big shipping, the biggest shipping line in the world has just also become the biggest terminal operator. And that has a lot of implications, really, a lot of good and bad things. But I was thinking, and some of the data from different SIDS, we spoke with Sri Lanka, it's not a SIDS, but island states, if you attract investment from a port operator that also has a shipping line or the way around, it is less likely that you fall off the cliff in times of COVID, because it's a bit of a captive market. There are many disadvantages. I'm not a fan of this vertical integration, but I think trying to find some positive, something good, some opportunities, that was something that came to my mind, and happy to discuss and disagree. Thank you.
I think it's, I didn't raise the inflationary issues. So that's super important to mention. And, we can't forget that was and is a key issue in that sort of worsened the already standing issues of higher costs. And so maybe that'll come up a bit more on how to address that. So why don't we turn to Manish Kothari? Manish, maybe if you do want to give us a little background on the context of why you would be answering this question, please feel free. But I think we wanted to hear about some of the strategies that SIDS can use in improving the resilience and connectivity and of infrastructure in their country. So what are some general ideas of strategies that you can bring from your perspective?
Thank you. So, just to follow up on this, the reason why there is a need for looking at it as a holistic thing is because the climate impacts or the disasters are on a rise. I mean, just to put something in context, the last year, the global economic loss due to disasters, and I'm not including man-made disasters, just natural disasters, is to the tune of $350 to $400 billion. And while we can talk about connectivity in SID, I want to expand it a little forward and say that we are all interconnected. The wildfires in California will have an impact on the climate and the ocean's rising water temperatures. Just the wildfire in the United States, and we are in March, is budgeted to be around $60 billion. So I think these disasters are going forward, and the countries need to put together a strategy as one, and not only the island nations, but the mainland as well. The important thing is to establish the inter-island efficiencies, operational efficiencies. The geopolitical stresses are forcing neighbors to take opposite sides. So there's lack of planning, and there's a lack of uniform approach to integrate it, whether it's in ports. I mean, you talk about BlackRocks and others investing in infrastructure in terms of buying the ports or operationals, but if you don't invest in the road transport or the rail transport, their ports won't be efficient. So I think there is a need for improved efficiencies of expanding not only the capacity, but also the policies and the regulatory framework. Coastal protection measures are very important, as are the safeguarding of the airports, and the vulnerability that SIDS have is much higher in terms of the devastation that is caused. It's mortality. I mean, that twice the mortality rates because the thing goes through. So I think developing local industries is very, very important. I think we are blessed to be working in Guyana and in Fiji, and we feel that the governments that take it seriously as an inclusive, but look for innovative solutions in putting some technology to work. We've used drones and cadastral surveys to develop a BIM model. So not only do we design an infrastructure to what needs to be done, but to be also able to give back as an asset management tool with these countries to increase the efficiencies on how they can continue to do it. So capitalizing on advanced technologies, operational efficiencies, talking to each other. I think, well, it is so common and simple, it's often very difficult to do. So I think, and the bank plays an extremely good role in terms of allowing that platform to see the importance of leveraging it. And I think integrated infrastructure planning, I mean, we just can't build back what was destroyed. I think we need to take into account the new materials and the new technologies that are available, as well as, in terms of integrating it with digitalization of things. So I think some of these are some of the strategies, I think, which could hopefully minimize the environmental disasters and have improved access to core services.
Great. And I think we'll come back to some of the beyond strategies, what kinds of things we could look at in terms of design and the like. But I wanted to shift our discussion to the great country representatives we have here. We have Minister Juan Egil here from Guyana. And first of all, I wanted to know if you could, first part of my question is maybe a request of, Guyana is not an island, but for many of here present may help to understand why you share many characteristics with SIDS and why it's considered essentially or classified as a SID or a small island developing state with others that are in your class, kind of like Belize and some other nations that have similar traits. So that would be nice. But second would be we have a changing climate. We've seen here in the United States the effect of more rains and some the increasing severity of storms and the devastation that's had on certain areas. But I know places like Guyana too are are at risk and already experiencing more extreme hydro-related events. So I wanted to first ask the question, what are you developing in terms of a strategy to deal with resilience in your country from your position in working on these infrastructure and transport issues?
Well, thank you very much, moderator. Let me thank the World Bank for allowing us to be part of this discussion. Guyana is part of the South American mainland. We're a country of 83,000 square miles, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural society. And the most important thing here to say is that we are 6 feet below the sea. The islands are above the sea, we are below the sea. And we share the common waters. But the peculiarity of Guyana is the fact that we have the challenges of rising sea levels, extreme weather patterns, both in terms of drought and in terms of rainfall, and flooding. When Guyana's drainage system was built by the Dutch, it was built to drain 2 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. And of course, you could read the data. 2 inches of rainfall is what we can get in 15 minutes now. So the understanding of flooding and how that could impact on agriculture, which for many, many years worked as the mainstay of our economy. But in terms of strategies to deal with these realities, firstly, we've embarked on a very aggressive coastal protection, which has to do with our sea defenses. That falls directly under me as the minister responsible for infrastructure as well. And we have been able to successfully build out and maintain our sea defenses. So coastal protection is a very important part of that strategy. Climate adaptation and mitigation policies is also something that we are heavily working on. We have developed a national adaptation plan, which basically outline measures to increase resilience and climate change. And the plan covers a wide range of sectors, from agriculture, water resources, to health, to infrastructure. And we have to continue to work in that regard to safeguard the country. We're not just going to fold up and say Guyana is going to be destroyed and disappear. As a matter of fact, everyone in this room should come to Guyana because beautiful things are happening in Guyana. It's the place where everybody wants to be. And basically, it's no news to you because you're all international partners and players. Guyana is leading in 3 areas globally right now. The discussion on climate security, the discussion on food security, and the discussion on energy security. And we believe that all 3 are interlinked. You know, we are now an oil-producing country, and we are exploiting those resources from our EEZ, and it's been doing pretty well. And that has led to us becoming the fastest growing economy in the world. So if you used to hear about Guyana and Jonestown, that's no longer the tagline. When you Google Guyana, you hear it's the fastest growing economy in the world. Forest conservation and sustainable development is also one of our strategies, and that's what we boast. We have one of the largest forests remaining in the world. 7/8 of our country is still forests. And we have developed the low carbon development strategy. The low carbon development strategy is both an economic strategy as well as a developmental strategy. It's an economic strategy because we are able to sequester and store in our forests, we have a very large capacity for our carbon sink. It has been assessed, the quantities have been measured, and we can now trade carbon credits on the international scene from our forests. And as a result of that, we have been able to sell 30% of the available credits for $750 million US dollars. And the government has committed 15% of that to development of the communities that live in the forest. We have about 242 indigenous community, Amerindian communities there, various tribes there. And those communities are developing plans and strategies for their own protection and ensuring that there is resilience and sustainability in what they're doing. So support is lent to those communities to develop their plans, and it is purely finance. And the decision-making is purely by the local leadership, using, ensuring that they have all the information and that they are making informed consent. So we are continuing on a path. We have a reality that is before us, and there's lots more that I can say here this afternoon, but I don't think the time would allow me to speak. I have the honor of facing the problem that most people have. You don't give a mic to a politician and a preacher, and I happen to be both. So it's double trouble when you give me a microphone, but that's what I will say for that. We'll come back to the questions. Thank you.
Well, we'll come back to you. No worries. Permanent Secretary Juanita Joseph, why don't we hear about some of the challenges you're facing in St. Lucia? We know about in the Caribbean, there's hurricanes, there's a lot of water, threats of rains. Those threats are increasing. They're not just threats, they're actually happening more and more. Maybe you can talk about some of the natural hazards that are occurring more, and we can get into and if you'd like to talk about some of the needs around where that investment is needed for resilience investments.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to express my very deep appreciation to the World Bank for this opportunity. The World Bank is doing tremendous work in St. Lucia. So for us to have a voice in a forum like this is excellent. So we really appreciate this opportunity. Just to give a sense to contextualize what's happening in St. Lucia. St. Lucia is a very small island, a truly small island developing state. We are 238 square miles. 27 miles long, 14 miles wide. That gives you an indication of the size of the country. Our population is between 180 to 185,000 persons, and we rely very heavily on our tourism sector. Infrastructurally, before I go into the hazards part, I need to explain why this is important to us. So we have a tripod of transportation in St. Lucia, which would include our maritime transport or our seaports, our airports, and also our road transport network. These are all very vital to our economy. Everything comes in to one of the ports, either the airport or the seaport. To give an indication of the importance, when we looked at our arrival numbers, the record of arrivals for our airports, we recorded over 400,000 stayover arrivals in 2024. This is like a little over 14% from 2023. For cruise passengers, we recorded over 700 arrivals for our cruise passengers, and this is like 17% over 2023. We recorded over 450, maybe 460 cruise calls in 2024 alone. So that gives you an understanding and an appreciation for how critical our ports are, because this is where all of our economy it starts from the ports. We also have a blossoming a subsector within the tourism sector, which is the yachting industry. We recorded over 42,000 yacht visitors, and this is also a 6.6% from 2023. So having experience with those figures, it really gave us a sense of how critical our coastal infrastructure is, our airports and our seaports. It also meant that we had to do something to upgrade because we had issues with congestion at the ports. We have a very small port facility, especially our international airport, which has to process all of those persons who come in, but we're not able to do so. So we have embarked on a very rigorous program of airport development. We want to be able to receive much larger aircraft because the demand is there. St. Lucia is a very beautiful island. I have to put a plug also. It's not just Guyana, but I would like to invite all of you to visit also.
You could do it twin.
Yes. So we are doing quite a bit to expand our runways so that, both the taxiways and the runways, that we can accommodate larger aircraft. We are also looking at upgrading our equipment because obviously if you're going to introduce larger aircraft, you want to make sure that you can ensure safety in navigation. And we are also contemplating improvements to just the facilities on a whole, and especially in the south of the island, our drainage. And that's where I'm going to get into our natural hazards. The location of the airport is subject to constant flooding. We have a river that runs in quite close proximity to the airport. So it's always subject to flooding, especially if there is heavy rainfall. So it's really important as one of our critical infrastructure to protect that infrastructure. So we have embarked on a number of initiatives that will assist in creating a safer environment to, I guess, the whole airport redevelopment initiative. And I also have to say that the World Bank is also very instrumental in assisting with that through what we call our Caribbean Air Connectivity Project. They have been providing assistance to us. So with all of the storm surge, the flooding and so on, these are critical infrastructure that we have to look at. We also have our seaports, which are also very critical based on the cruise arrivals that we have. We have embarked on a very ambitious cruise port development initiative. Our cruise ports, Castries is the main port. That port sees, I'm sorry, I just realized I've run out of time. I didn't realize I was talking so much. But we see so much in terms of cargo, ferry, as well as passenger. So because of the criticality of that port also, there is also an ongoing program to redevelop our seaports so that a lot of the issues that we have been encountering, we are able to resolve them. But I'm sure I can go into more details so that if there are any questions, we can have further discussion on that since my time is.
Yeah, no, and I think we can come back to some of those issues after some other questions. So I wanted to go to another ocean in the Pacific now, or I guess away from this Caribbean Sea and out to across Mexico and into the Pacific. So let's turn to hear from Minister Sala Dalbana. I want to thank you for coming a long way to be here in Washington for transforming transportation. I think we know what people know about Fiji. We know that its people have a history of being a seafaring people and actually being quite ahead of the rest of the world, probably in the ability to travel long distances and so forth by sea. But currently, the country is reliant also increasingly on its aviation connectivity. And I wanted to know just sort of what role does transport play in connecting you to the rest of the world? And specifically, is there what can you tell us more about the role aviation is playing in the country? And we can get into other issues around it too later, but please feel free.
Thank you, Ben. I think you've promoted me to a minister.
Oh, I did.
Not a minister.
Well, congratulations.
First of all, I'd like to thank the bank for this opportunity. And when the invitation came for us to be part of this panel, there was no second thought, because we wanted to come and share our story on the importance of air connectivity for us as a small island developing states. And I know the session and the speakers before me have talked about small island developing states, but in the Pacific, in other forums, we're also referred to as big ocean states, or the BOSS. So that connotation really refers to the amount of a massive ocean that we exist in. And this contributes to how much reliance we have not only internally as a country, but also externally in terms of trade, in terms of mobility, in terms of economic growth. Air connectivity is really the lifeline for us. And if I can give the specific example for Fiji, for us, similar to my colleague permanent secretary, what she has mentioned, tourism really is the number one revenue earner for us. And it holds about 40% of our gross domestic product. That's how much earnings tourism brings for us as a country. And the bulk of our tourists really arrive by air. And the strength for us is that we have an international airport, but we also have a national airline, Fiji Airways. So that really adds to the strength of air connectivity for us. And we also pride ourselves in being able to connect ourselves to the region as well. So as you know, the oceans, the way the islands are scattered, for Fiji alone, we have more than 300 islands, and some are not even inhabited. And we have only one international airport. We have a second airport, but it can't take the loading that we have in the main international airport. And so if you close that one airport, that really means we shut ourselves down, not only as a country, but also in our connection to the regional countries. So just to add a little bit in terms of connecting with the regional countries, for some of them, they really rely on this because to get from one point to the other, the routes are long and thin. So the planes that really can service those regions are the limited capacity seating planes. So when you run the routes, the fares actually are higher for those passengers that actually want to access these other islands in the Pacific. So these are some of the challenges that we as a regional bloc, as a Pacific bloc, we have our Pacific Aviation Ministers meeting that's coming up next week. And it's actually the first time we're holding an in-person Aviation Ministers meeting for the region. Excuse me. And what we hope to achieve from that meeting is also how we can come together as a regional bloc to address the challenges for us in terms of connectivity. And we have a Pacific Regional Aviation Strategy, which we hope will be part of the implementation phase for us to bring together the leaders to see how we can all have a collective solution in how we drive and maintain connectivity for ourselves as a region.
Great. Great perspective and experience to hear about. I wanted to turn back to Manish Kothari. We talked about some of the infrastructure, airports, ports, roads. What are some of the design standards or principles or considerations that you're seeing as important for SIDS to use and implement?
There is, the SIDS, they already, as the Honorable Minister said, they're coming out with policy guidelines at national levels. But they could also benefit from some of the global standards that have been developed. And for example, the FIDIC has, in partnership with WWF, released the nature positive infrastructure, which takes into account that not only the issues and challenges of climate change, but rising sea levels and how to look at the materials and plan accordingly. American Society of Civil Engineers has developed a toolkit for resilient infrastructure, the AAC 7 and 73-23 in particular, that I think the SIDS countries could benefit from in terms of developing a sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And our projects, in Guyana, as the Honorable Minister said, they're 6 foot under. So there's a big challenge of flooding. And even when you go from the airport to Georgetown, there are the sluice gates along the way. But I think there are new ways of controlling flood controls in that areas in terms of not just use sheet piles, but different materials that can be used, as well as identifying the defenses or more storage capacity in terms of high water flood levels and anticipated impacts because of the frequency with which they're getting the rains and the floods that are happening. So I think use of materials is another thing that a lot of things can be benefited from. I mean, in Fiji, on our project, we used the large blasted rock for seawall defense, which was very, very effective, as well as to change the culvert types. When many times we are the engineers are the self-created problem because we want to follow the codes which are outdated, but it takes forever to revise a code. So to allow for innovation in materials or exceptions on code takes a big, big thing. One of the quick fixes has been, depending on the hydrology analysis and digital data collection, to just upsize it, because you don't need to really size to the most efficiency, because you can be assured that the next flood is going to be bigger and larger. So I think Guyana is a good example, but they also have something called oil. So there is a currency that helps them invest in future planning and be a leader to develop an infrastructure, not only for today, but for tomorrow. So American Society of Civil Engineers, FIDIC, also has a Sustainable Development Committee, which is chaired by Tracy Ryan from New Zealand, from Oricon. And she's well aware of the challenges, the small island. So I think FIDIC is a good global body that deals with all different economies in an interconnected world we live in. And I think just while we may talk about the floods or we may talk about the rains or the airports, but the point is everything is connected. If you can't, the roads, the airports, the ports, and with sovereign fund financing is a big challenge. I mean, the banks contribute to less than 10%, I think, of the global infrastructure needs. So I think, how do we leverage good investments so the insurance companies are willing to invest in these infrastructure projects as well?
Great. Permanent Secretary Joseph, we were talking a bit, you were talking at the end of your comments, some of the infrastructure you are developing. I think particularly the airport and some of those investments, but perhaps you wanted to continue on what the point you were making about some of the projects you're focused on.
Yeah, so thank you. So having set that tone to appreciate the importance of our infrastructure, airports, seaports, we have embarked on a number of initiatives, which include airport redevelopment, which I spoke about a little earlier, and also for the seaports. This is also critical because based on the number of the passenger throughput that we get at the ports, our seaport especially is very congested because it's mixed use. There's cargo, there's passenger, there's ferry activities happening, which obviously is not efficient for a port to operate. We have recognized that, and we have also embarked on another project of port development. So a very important initiative now is to relocate some of these activities, cargo. And I have to tell you that over the last few months, it has become very clear that this just wasn't working, because on some occasions, when you want to offload cargo, you can't, because there's a cruise vessel in port. That obviously has a spillover effect on your economy, because business is stifled because you're not able to clear goods as quickly as possible. So in order for us to address some of these challenges, we are going to relocate the cargo operations. We also want to relocate the ferry operations, so that at least you want to enhance the visitor experience. Excuse me, you want to enhance the visitor experience. You want to also stimulate economic activity by allowing your business commerce to take place. in order for us to be able to do that also, we have to significantly invest in our road infrastructure. And that's the third part. That while we're making all of these investments into airports and seaports, we really need to be able to move the goods and people from the ports further inland. So we are also very heavily investing in our road infrastructure to ensure that we're able to provide, to enhance the ease of doing business. So for those, we are looking at road widening, we are looking at creating additional roads or alternative routes to help encourage freer movement so that the connectivity is there not just from external sources, but even inland, internally, we are able to enhance the connectivity of all of our transport systems.
Great. Good to hear about those things happening. And just, I think you were describing why just these ports are such lifelines in a place like St. Lucia. Minister Edgell, you talked about Guyana being the fastest growing economy in the world, which is quite something. And we were just hearing about some of the efforts on road connectivity in St. Lucia, but I imagine with that fast growing economy, you have quite a bit of needs in increasing your road connectivity and how you get goods to market and so forth, and people to jobs and so forth. How can you comment on some of the roadway investments that are being done in the rural and urban context?
Well, thank you for the question, and I would be very careful with my words, since some of my friends from the IDB who are helping, and this is in the room as well as the World Bank. But let me give you a context. CARICOM has decided that it must reduce their food import bill by 25% by 2025. In as much as the Caribbean is such a small community, the food import bill is great because we have to feed those monsters that come in terms of the cruise ships with thousands of people on them every single day. So we have a food issue to supply them, and then we also have to deal with the garbage and waste disposal and how that affects the environment as well. But so in order for us to be able to do that, we have to open up new lands in Guyana. New lands. We're going to be self-sufficient in poultry and a net exporter of poultry in 2025. In terms of feed for animals, we've had to plant soya and corn to develop the capacity to feed, because you could bring in the hatching eggs, you can bring in everything, but you have to have the feed. We've been able to expand that. So we're building out thousands of kilometers. I didn't say hundreds, thousands of kilometers of roads to match what is happening in agriculture and to get it to the port. Now, we have a major challenge in that our draft to be able to allow vessels to come in is not that great because of massive desiltation in the Demerara River. We have to dredge. So we're also looking now at building out a deep water harbor in the Berbice area. And why are we building out the deep water harbor? Because we have to establish the connectivity to get into Brazil. So we are working right now on the road network from Linden through to Lethem, which connects Guyana and Brazil. We're putting in place a bridge across the Corentyne River, which will connect Guyana and Suriname. And then we are building out the connectivity. So you can move from Brazil in one section to French Guyana, to Suriname, to Guyana, down the road network, the Linden-Lethem road network, over the Takatu, and you're back into northern Brazil, where there are 20 million people waiting to get food. Just last night, we were discussing with our colleagues from Brazil, when the Amazon is dry, it could be months before a vessel could get through. And when there is water, it takes you 7 days to get out to the sea. Through Guyana, you can get 48 hours, 72 hours. So it is a significant reduction. The justification of an investment in a deep water harbor and connectivity with Brazil in order to provide food security is key. But not only that, but now us being in oil and gas, energy security is what is required. The countries of the Caribbean are looking to Guyana to provide that level of energy security. We have to be able to get gas, not just oil, but gas, whether it's for cooking and other needs that exist. So we're building out that network. But I think our flagship that is happening right now is because of the development that is taking place in Guyana. Just imagine 13 new hotels, branded hotels are being built currently, 109 educational institutions, whether it be nursery schools, primary schools, secondary schools, or dormitories are being built right now. We got 13 regional hospitals that are being built right now, adding to what is there. More than 50,000 families are developing their own homes in new areas that have been opened as a result of our housing boom. The government has given out house lots to the locals to be able to develop. So as you spread out, people have to be able to come. We have a bridge that is called the Demerara Harbor Bridge that connects two main regions where there's a populated center. It could take you 2 hours to get to work and get home from work because of congestion. We're building out a new bridge right now. It should be completed by August of this year, which will see that same location of people moving. You travel for 25, 30 minutes, you could leave home much later, and you could get to work on time because the difference that is making. Community roads and farm-to-market access roads are some of the key interventions in between 2020 to now, since we are in government this time. We have done more than 4,000 community roads. That represents thousands of kilometers of community roads in villages, and the build out of farm to market access roads. And because Guyana, the name Guyana means land of many waters. So we have many rivers, and some people, we have a river that has 365 islands in it. So I'm looking across at Fiji there. They're in the ocean, but we just have a river with 365 islands in it. So the big challenge, and I think the conversation here this afternoon has to do with two things. At what cost do you build resilient infrastructure? And what are the technical standards and the designs that are acceptable? Because if you want something to cue you into 20 to 25 years or even 50 years in terms of standing, the durability and dealing, there are times when there is rain in Guyana, an entire road could be washed off, destroyed, disappear. You can't pass. You have to use boats to connect. So our road infrastructure, reducing travel time, great accessibility, getting products to the market, and at the same time providing that connectivity to bring the kind of security that is needed to ensure things can keep moving. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, excellent. If you want that economic reliability and stability, you need those road resilience to happen. And these really wonderful comments. And I actually didn't know about the meaning of Guyana. That's really nice to hear. Permanent Secretary Dalbana, we don't, in your country, there's no roads and bridges, but there are seas. And so when we talk about inter-island connectivity, what are some of the key needs that you're facing or that you're trying to address? You mentioned you have 2 airports, but with so many islands and people spread about, how do you get, what are the challenges and how you're addressing those in terms of that inter-island transport?
Yes, we do have roads, bridges, and jetties. So don't worry.
I'm not saying you don't. Sorry.
And we have our Chief Executive Officer, Fiji Roads Authority here, so he knows more than me on land and road connectivity. But I just speak a little bit to air connectivity in a domestic context. So I did say we have 2 airports, but there are 2 main airports that can be deemed international. One is the main airport and the second one, but the second one can't take that capacity. We have other airports within the country, but they're scattered. And we do have the domestic airline, which is the Fiji Link, which is a subsidiary of Fiji Airways. So that airline services the outer islands, but the routes are uneconomical. So the challenge for us as a government is every year we have to pump in subsidies to be able to service those routes. So those routes exist also because to travel by boat, some of these locations take more than a day for you to reach there. So it's probably 2-3 days, or the shortest one you can just reach within a day. But the long haul routes, if you go by sea, it would take you some time. So the decision by government is that those routes, though that we need to pump money into it, we still need to maintain those routes. So the challenge for us is how do we keep maintaining these routes, but at an economical level? And the second issue is really the infrastructure on the ground. So some of these airports, they're not airports. I think they're airstrips, and some are just some of the grass, and then you can see the pilots are really skillful in how they land these small aircrafts. But the infrastructure on the ground is the other challenge. So while I still have the opportunity, I just wanted to also put it within the Pacific context. So if I speak about the Pacific context, we know that discussions are being considered by some of the states, certainly for Fiji, in terms of what is the most sustainable infrastructure when we talk about airports. And we can talk about elevated infrastructure or floating airports as some of the alternatives when we talk about climate change. But the other real issue that the Pacific states face is how do you maintain safe, secure air connectivity? So without a safe connectivity, without a secure connectivity, there is no real guarantee that you can continue to operate your connections, that you can continue to operate the airports on the ground. So that is something that Fiji, as a member of the Pacific Bloc, is trying to assist states as well. We have I think if some are familiar in the room, in terms of the International Civil Aviation Organization threshold that you have to meet to be able to keep operating. So Fiji is the only state that is above the global average. So the other Pacific states, they're not at that par. So this is something we're also helping with. So while we can talk about what sort of real resilient infrastructure we need on the ground, the other challenge is making sure you're safe and secure so that your connectivity is not only maintainable, but also is operational for everybody.
Good. I'm going to go one last question here for Jan Hoffman. I've tried to get 2 questions in per panelist, so thank you for understanding. And we'll try to get 1 or 2 quick audience questions in. I know we're running just a tad over. But Jan Hoffman, we know the need for decarbonization to help mitigate impacts of climate change for small island developing states. But we also know that comes at a cost to maritime transport and the like. What are these trade-offs, or what are we facing here in terms of the next few years?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, really glad to hear we are shooting in the same direction here with the SITs. So ideally, you insinuated, one could say, well, the SITs didn't cause climate change, so why do they have to pay so much of a price, and so on and so forth. And in many other industries, I would almost say in all other industries except air and shipping, you could say, and under Paris you say, okay, if you have a cement factory in Ouagadougou or a brewery in Bujumbura, or so, okay, you are being given, you have more time, or you don't need to decarbonize that quickly or that much. In shipping, this simply does not work because it is international. It's a ship with a flag of Liberia and Filipino seafarers built in Korea and so on and so forth. It is not possible to give exceptions, which is why, in my personal opinion, the only way to still give some same but different responsibilities to the SITs is through an economic measure, which generates funds that can then support them in the transition.
Good points. Let's go to, I think we just have time for 2 quick questions, and they're going to need, we're already over time, so these questions are going to have to be like 15-second questions and 30-second answers, which amounts to a lot of substance. So
I can start
go
immediately.
ahead, quick.
The point that island states did not cause climate change but are suffering and have an existential crisis is so important. And do you know of any SIDS or bosses that are willing to become a model of sustainability to show other places that aren't trying hard that, hey, you got skin in the game, you're making a sustainable island? Every city region could be considered an island. They could also be doing those things, just basically up the ante on what people should be doing in the world.
Great. Does anybody want to try and answer that question?
In Guyana, I don't think we have reached the stage of vehicles, but we're dealing heavily with renewable energy. Because if we bring in electric buses,
I want to know, is there any place that's willing to be a model of the most decarbonization possible?
well, Guyana is already net zero, and we will be net zero 2050.
Well, the world is
Okay,
not.
we have to move to the next question. So we need questions and answers. Anybody have another quick question? Yes, down in the back there. Please come up to the mic.
Yeah, I think, as you've mentioned, one of the challenges that the small island states face is the fragmentation of the islands and not much of a union, like, say, a European Union. So perhaps to hear more on, do you find it challenging that perhaps even the development partners are working under different trust funds that have different objectives and the funding is not pooled because you're fragmented on your end and the funds, the development partners providing the funds are also sort of not unified to give you that benefit to incentivize private sector and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know who can speak. There are some unions and associate groups of countries. So maybe you want to.
There is CARICOM,
Yeah.
which is headquartered in Guyana. And most of the multilateral financial institutions are dealing with CARICOM as a single envelope as against individual countries. So they must come together and discuss what they will do, whether it's the UK SIF and some of the other funds that come. So it is being dealt with as a block. And there is a lot of engagement among the community. So there's not a deficit in terms of planning together. We have a famous poet from Guyana. He says, if it's either we swim together or we sink together. And that is how the CARICOM has been operating, either swimming together or sinking together.
Yeah, one more. Yeah,
May I
go
just say
ahead.
quickly, in addition to CARICOM, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States also performs that role. So there are bodies within the region that can provide the kind of interventions that she's speaking to.
Yeah.
I just explain a little bit. So for the Pacific states, we also have the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat that Fiji is a member of, and the other Pacific states. So we have funding from development partners that are channeled through that mechanism. But we also have in Fiji a World Bank funded program, the development of the North into a integrated tourism development spot in terms of growing tourism numbers. So what we did find was that when we started this program last year, is that there were different sections of the program which were funded under the World Bank, but were also funded by other development partners. So I think Amina has picked up on a good point, but that really is something that actually exists for us as well. Yeah.
Great.
The
So
overlap.
I think if folks want to learn more about these associations, please look into those. If you have questions about which associate, what exactly those were spelled out, we can help those. Please be in touch with us as organizers. I also wanted to note some of the resources you noted. I think a FIDIC resource that developed with WWF. And for those interested trying to find information about that, we'll try to circulate. Also, some projects with World Bank and IDB were mentioned and the like. What's the title of your publication? Playbook for Nature Positive Infrastructure Development. Thank you. Excellent. So thanks all for coming. We're a little late, so I know we're trying to get downstairs. So thanks again. Take care.